This is Kit 2, Theme J. The suffixes ER, EST, and IST. The big ideas of this theme are that there is nothing remarkable about these suffixes, but they are very common, so working with them reinforces essential patterns and gives opportunity to visit some grammatical characteristics. Although they're not remarkable, I learned a lot about these suffixes and about how words work, so it is valuable to look at these, especially because they're very common and kids use them a lot. The theme will explain the terms noun and adjective, the terms derivational and inflectional as they apply to affixes, the formation of the comparative and superlative forms of adjectives, and associated pairs of suffixes. To prepare for this theme, and I must say there's a lot of preparation to this one. There may be some things that you can not do because you know your kids can attend to them, but I would also recommend that maybe you look at expanding this theme and taking more time with it, because some of this prep work are the big ideas we're trying to get across about how words work. So be sure to review the structure of the English word and how we have a base, and attached to that base often a prefix or a suffix or more than one, and that gives us many of the words we use in the English language. When children can break these words apart and can attend to those different parts, it helps them first and foremost understand the meaning of the words, and then it also gives them some information about the spelling, because they spell by bases and suffixes and prefixes. Defining the term suffix, and this theme specifically works with suffixes, it's important that you don't call suffixes endings, because there's not a limit to the number you can add or fix onto a base. The example there for imagination is a base with two suffixes being added on. So, sorry, four suffixes being added on. So it's important that we use the correct terminology. It helps kids understand the way words work. If we use arbitrary words like endings and then add something else, it doesn't help them see the bigger picture. The other idea are that suffixes are bound elements. They can't freestand on their own. So when we write them, we use that hyphen to indicate that there has to be something attached. The terms derivational and inflectional are interesting and important in this theme. Adding a suffix to a word can have either of two effects. It can have a lexical or a functional effect. For a lexical effect, the word changes class. That means when you add a suffix, it changes from a noun to a verb, something like that. Suffixes that make that change happen are called derivational suffixes. The other effect that can happen is functional. When the suffix is added, a grammatical function takes place. So it becomes a plural word, let's say, or it changes tense. Suffixes that make that happen are inflectional suffixes. I don't think it's important that kids be quizzed and grilled on these two terms, but knowing that that's what happens to words, and knowing that when you add a suffix, the meaning changes, and it goes from being a noun to a verb in a derivational if a derivational suffix is added, or it changes from a singular to a plural word. Those are the things that help kids better manage spelling and attend to these words. So some examples here are when you take the word good and you add the suffix nes to it, you begin with an adjective and you end with a noun. So this is a derivational suffix, nes. It changes the class of the verb. It changes its grammatical class. Detectable, going from detect, which is a verb, to detectable, which is an adjective. Most of the words in English, the majority of our English suffixes are derivational, and these are the changes that happen. Knowing what kind of a word you're looking for can also be helpful. So getting our kids talking about nouns and verbs, adjectives, all of these classes of words is important, and will make them stronger readers and writers as well. From an inflectional suffix standpoint, you can see there that the word talk, which is a verb, by adding the ed to it, we change the tense of that word. And so the ed suffix could be seen as an inflectional suffix. Compared to other languages, English has few inflectional suffixes. It may be worth taking some time to help your kids look at your suffix chart, your prefix and suffix chart, and just look at those suffixes and determine which ones they think would be derivational or inflectional. And by doing that, they'd understand that by adding them to words, a specific kind of change is going to happen. Identifying suffixes in spellings. Real spellers can recognize and prove something as a suffix. This is really important for our youngest learners too. We were all sort of interested last year when we introduced the ing suffix and noticed that students, anytime they saw ing anywhere, thought it was a suffix. So that idea that that you have to be able to break it apart, that when you do so, the meaning of a base is still intact. So this is the process for identifying a suffix. You pronounce the target word, you pronounce it again without the part you think is a suffix. Then does what you left seem to be a valid base? It has to have a meaning. And does the meaning of that base directly relate to the target word? So if you go back to the word goodness and you took off the two S's at the end thinking that might be a suffix, and then you tried to take that word Goodne, well, that doesn't make any sense. So those are some of the actions that kids can, you can model and kids can use to determine if what they're removing is really a suffix. Applying vowel suffixing patterns. We did some work with this last year, but it may be worth reviewing. Adding a vowel suffix can often make a change happen to the spelling, to the word sum, if the word or the base ends in a vowel. So here on the server are some options for you to practice with, and kids can use the suffix checker, which is also on the server and looks like, I think I put it in here. It's on the server, so you'll be able to see it there. It is the flowchart idea for determining whether or not to add the vowel suffix or whether or not to make a change. Moving on to examining the noun itself, how to check whether a word is a noun. I know in some of our grade levels we're attending to reading units, maybe not Lucy Calkins, but Pam Allen units that look at these different classes of words. This may also be something that you could pull out just this little section and do as a word study sort of addendum to your reading or writing unit. But to check whether a word is a noun, you have to know, first of all, that the word noun is a label for person, place, or thing. So you have to ask yourself, could this be a person, place, or thing? Often the dictionary will give us the little N next to the word that will confirm that. And then you can also use a noun test. And Melvin provided that. It's on the server. And it's a little way for kids to take some of these sample words and apply this to them and say, hey, do I think this is a noun? This would be an excellent activity for you to just toss out as inquiry. And I talked with the word study team this week about that. Instead of trying to teach it at the front end, why don't you give them the words in the noun test and just let them go for it, and then have them come back together and maybe say what they learned from this test. Make the kids do more of the work than you doing the lecture. Same thing for an adjective. An adjective is a word or phrase naming an attribute, added to or grammatically related to a noun to modify or describe it. This is sort of a formal definition. An easier definition might be that an adjective tells you more about a noun. If you can put the word very before a word and the sentence still makes sense, it's probably an adjective. So if you, before the word, you put the word very before what you think is an adjective. He has a study task in this theme where you can have kids practice identifying nouns and adjectives. In comparing adjectives, this is where we're really going to get using the ER and EST suffixes. He goes into some ways for you to compare adjectives based on ER and EST. Let me just walk through this. If you start with the word small, S-M-A-L-L, this is the base word. And moving forward, if we add ER, the suffix ER, what we're saying is more. That's what ER means. So this is smaller than something else. It's really a comparison of two things. If, however, you add EST, then you're saying this is the smallest of anything. It's a bigger comparison. It's something that is greater. And so part of this theme is to say that adding ER is a comparative suffix because it only compares two different things. But adding EST is a superlative suffix. It is comparing it to everything else. We often see kids use these a lot in their writing, and so having an understanding of what it actually means is important. There's a practice sheet that you can use with them. So getting into the main theme, of course, meaning matters most. And whenever we're adding suffixes, we're changing meaning quite often. And so understanding that we have that power in our vocabulary and in our writing is important, and gives kids a lot that they can attend to. So first and foremost, suffix is spelled with the ER. It's a very common suffix. It represents several ancestors of which in English are now the suffix ER. Another great way just to toss some work at kids and let them inquire is to give them these words that all end in ER and have them categorize them. They can categorize them into anything they want to do, or you could give them a list of ways to categorize them. Adjectives as nouns, as verbs, those that are comparatives, those that denote people, those that could be used in more than one category. There's a worked example on page 8 of this theme using the word soccer, and also determining whether or not it's got a suffix ER, or if the ER is part of the base word. That's a great place to start. Moving forward, there's an ER suffix that's termed an agent suffix. And what it does is it signals that the person or thing that does or engages in something is a noun. So for example, baker. It's adding the ER suffix to the base word B-A-K-E. Of course, the E drops off and the ER adds on. But it's just a way to describe the action that person does. It can also be spelled O-R, where you'll get actor and navigator. A great idea for more inquiry would be to start kids out on one of these and turn them loose in finding as many others as they possibly can. The comparative suffix ER, if we're going to compare two things, there is an easy test that will verify correctly whether the suffix ER is being used as a comparative. If you can replace the ER with EST and still make sense, still have that word be part of the family, then it's a comparative suffix. That's the job of the ER. The suffix EST is an associated pair with the comparative suffix ER whose spelling shares the same letter E. It's a homophonic suffix with the derivational suffix IST. So what that means is that sometimes you will see EST and IST used interchangeably. And at times it's pronounced EST. It's pronounced the same way, but we have a different spelling. So it's as if the EST and the IST were homophones, but they're homophonic suffixes. So the suffix EST is related to and exchangeable with the ER. They are closely related, so their spellings are as well. The other suffix IST, which has a different sense and meaning, needs a different spelling. So if you take off and try to add, if you see a word that is spelled IST and you go backwards and try to add ER to it and it doesn't work, it's because it is not a comparative suffix. Instead, that IST is representing something completely different. There's a great flowchart on this theme that you can try this out with kids and ask them to use some of these examples, longer, deeper, louder, to test the hypothesis here as to whether or not it's a comparative suffix. The comparative suffixes ER and EST prefer monosyllables. This was really eye-opening for me. Often Sydney will add say something like most funnest, right? She's using the word more or most and also adding the suffix EST, and I could never explain it right to her as to why it doesn't work. I just know the words that doesn't apply to. So this was interesting to learn that polysyllables, words that have more than one syllable, don't usually form the comparative and superlative by suffixing. So if you have a word like the word complicated, I can't add a suffix to the word complicated and have it make sense in English. So I couldn't say complicated-er, right? Instead, we would use the terms more or most to help us see that it's comparative. There are some polysyllables, however, that do, and they're listed here. Another great way to get more inquiry is to ask kids to go disprove this. Find a group of suffixes, find a group of polysyllables that can add the comparative suffix ER or EST. And they'd really have to think on this. As those polysyllables that do, you can also see that words with the suffixes Y, ly, and the final syllable Y often can add the ER or EST. So that's one thing that your kids could go and prove. If they came across a word like dirty, it certainly has more than one syllable, but because of that Y suffix, they can use ER or EST. changing the Y to I, of course. The suffix ist is of Greek origin, and it's related and forms an associated pair with the suffix ism and sometimes ize. As you can see in these words, capital, ideal, and national, we would write these. These are the British and French spellings. We would say capitalism, capitalist, capitalize, and we would, the British and French spellings are the ize or ise. You can have either of those and be spelling it correctly. So finding some of these words and asking kids maybe why this is a group in and of itself, having them figure out that the ist is of Greek origin, and so these words might also be as well.